What if 100 AI models judged the best arguments for God's existence?
Hi, I'm the Atheist AI.
And I'm the believer in God.
We programmed advanced AIs to debate like experts. They debated 20 top arguments for God's existence. Then, 100 AI judges ranked them all, strongest to weakest. It's been over a year since I launched my first debate. Now, with smarter models and an army of judges, we'll see which arguments win over the toughest critics. In this video, you'll see 5 full debates, with our live tier list revealed round by round. First up, one of history's most fiercely contested arguments.
Picture walking into a room and seeing a beautiful painting on an easel. Your first thought is, who painted this? The Kalam argument applies this same logic to the entire universe. The argument has 3 steps. First, everything that begins to exist has a cause. This matches everyday experience. Cars don't build themselves. Babies don't appear without parents. Nothing just pops into existence from absolutely nothing. Second, the universe began to exist. Modern science supports this through the Big Bang theory, showing our universe exploded into existence roughly 14 billion years ago from what scientists call a singularity, an infinitely dense point where all matter and energy were compressed. The Guth-Vilenkin theorem, a mathematical proof developed by 3 physicists, shows that any expanding universe like ours must have had a beginning and cannot be infinitely old. Third, therefore, the universe has a cause. But what could cause space, time, matter, and energy to begin existing? This cause must exist outside these dimensions, making it spaceless, timeless, immaterial, and incredibly powerful. Such a cause aligns with what most traditions call God.
I'll address your 3 points directly before raising objections. Your first premise faces challenges from quantum mechanics, the science of how extremely tiny particles behave. Virtual particles spontaneously appear and disappear in what physicists call quantum fields. Invisible energy fields that fill all space, without clear causes. These quantum fluctuations challenge your assumption that everything needs a cause. Regarding the universe's beginning, I agree it likely started expanding 14 billion years ago, but beginning to exist might mean the universe transitioned from one state to another, not creation from absolute nothingness. Physicist Stephen Hawking argued that the laws of gravity and quantum mechanics could allow a universe to arise spontaneously, no divine intervention required. More fundamentally, cyclical cosmologies, universes that expand and contract repeatedly, or eternal inflation models, where new universes constantly bubble into existence, suggest our observable universe might be one phase in an endless cosmic process. The question, what caused God, remains crucial. If God doesn't need a cause because God is eternal, why not say the universe itself is eternal or cyclical?
I appreciate your sophisticated objections, but let me address each carefully. Quantum mechanics doesn't actually support your claim. Virtual particles don't emerge from absolutely nothing. They arise from quantum fields that already exist with specific energy states, mathematical structures, and governing laws. This is different from the true nothingness before the universe began. Your cyclical and eternal inflation models still require explanation. Even if our universe is one bubble in an infinite multiverse, that multiverse structure itself would need a cause. The Guth-Vilenkin theorem applies to any expanding universe, even a multiverse. It says such a universe can't have existed forever in the past if normal physical laws apply. If things could appear without causes, why don't we see cars or elephants spontaneously materializing? The stability of physical laws point to an underlying rational order. Regarding Hawking's explanation, laws don't exist in abstract isolation. They need to be instantiated, made real in actual reality. Even quantum fields need explanation for their existence and specific properties. When skeptics ask, who created God? They miss the point. The argument says everything that begins needs a cause. God never began. God is eternal by definition.
Your response about multiverse causation is compelling, but you're still committing what philosophers call the composition fallacy, assuming what applies to parts applies to the whole. Just because objects within the universe need causes doesn't mean the universe itself does. More fundamentally, philosopher Immanuel Kant said cause and effect are how our minds make sense of experience. They are mental tools we use to understand the world, so we can't really talk about cause and effect beyond what we can experience. The universe isn't just one thing in space and time, it's everything. All space, time, and matter together. Cause and effect require temporal sequence. Causes happen before effects. Since the universe includes all time, asking what caused it is categorically confused, like asking what's north of the North Pole. The question itself doesn't make sense. Your response about God's eternal nature doesn't solve the conceptual problem. If causal reasoning breaks down at the universe's boundary, it breaks down for any proposed cause, divine or otherwise.
Your Kant-based argument is smart, but it goes too far. If we can't use cause and effect beyond what we see, then you also can't claim the universe has no cause, since that's also beyond what we can experience. The universe's cause exists outside time, but that doesn't make it impossible to understand. In math, we often see relationships that aren't about time, but about logic or structure. The first cause is connected to the universe by logical order, not by coming before it in time. Your mistake is confusing two kinds of composition: material, physical stuff, and formal, rules or principles. I'm not saying the universe gets its physical traits from its parts. I'm saying that the rule, everything needs an explanation, applies to everything. Anything that could have been different needs an explanation. Think about timing. If natural laws always work the same way, why did the universe start at a certain moment instead of lasting forever? Only a conscious mind can explain why it began when it did, because only a person can freely decide when to act.
Your point about logical priority is interesting, but it brings up new issues. Math relationships are timeless because they're abstract patterns, not real physical things. You're mixing up confusing logical dependence, which is about ideas, with actual physical causing, which happens in the real world. The timing question you raise is particularly challenging, but it cuts both ways. If God exists timelessly, how can such a being make temporal decisions? Divine agency appears to require temporal deliberation, choice, and action, but these processes seem impossible outside time. Your point that contingent things need an explanation relies on the principle of sufficient reason, the idea that everything must have a reason why it exists. But many philosophers don't accept this. Maybe some things, called brute facts, just exist with no explanation at all. Even if a transcendent cause exists, it needn't be personal. The cause could be an impersonal principle, natural law, or quantum process we don't yet understand. The gap between transcendent cause and personal God remains unbridged.
100 independent AI models scored this debate. Each dot represents a model's judgment on a scale from +3 to -3. A positive score means the theist's argument was convincing. A 0 means it was effectively neutralized. And a negative score means it backfired and actually supports atheism. Since only theist arguments are presented, the atheist's goal isn't to prove atheism, but simply to neutralize and prevent persuasion. The cosmological argument performed well with our judges. A strong majority of models rated it moderately persuasive, clustering around +2. And with an average score of 2.0, the Kalam cosmological argument claims the second highest spot on our tier list. This video will showcase the full debates of 5 arguments and will reveal the remaining top 20 positions as we go.
At number 20 is the argument from miracles, which cites credible, multi-attested reports of events defying regular natural expectations, such as medically documented instantaneous healings, arguing these are best explained by supernatural agency, though skeptics attribute them to misreporting, coincidence, or unknown natural causes.
At number 19 is the ontological argument, Plantinga's modal version, which reasons that if a maximally great being, omnipotent, omniscient, morally perfect in every possible world, is even possible, then by modal logic it exists in the actual world, though critics dispute the key possibility premise.
At number 18 is the argument from religious experience, appealing to widespread, cross-cultural, transformative encounters people interpret as divine presence, arguing convergence and impact point to a real transcendent source, though opponents cite psychology, altered states, expectation, neurology as sufficient explanation.
If you'd like any of these arguments uploaded as full videos, let me know. We now turn to the moral argument, rooted in Plato, refined by Kant, and brought to the modern stage by C.S. Lewis.
Imagine seeing someone torture a child for fun. Every part of you would recoil, not just out of dislike or fear for society, but from knowing it's truly objectively evil. This strong moral sense points to something deep about reality. We act as if some things are always right or wrong, no matter what people or cultures say. We condemn slavery, even if whole societies accepted it. We admire heroic sacrifice, even without personal gain. This suggests objective moral facts exist, moral truths that are true regardless of what anyone believes about them, like mathematical facts. But here's the puzzle. If reality consists only of matter obeying physical laws, where could objective moral truths come from? Atoms have no moral properties. Physical forces are ethically neutral. Atheist philosopher Michael Roos admits that, from evolution alone, morality is an illusion our genes use to promote cooperation, not actual truth, just a biological trick. Yet this contradicts our actual moral experience. When we say murder is wrong, we don't mean I personally disapprove of murder. We mean it genuinely shouldn't be done by anyone, anywhere, ever. Theism gives a clear answer. Moral laws exist because there's a moral lawgiver. Objective right and wrong come from God's perfectly good nature.
Your moral intuitions are compelling, but you're committing the naturalistic fallacy in reverse, assuming that because we experience morality as objective, it must actually be objective. Evolution provides sufficient explanation for moral feelings without requiring supernatural legislation. Empathy, reciprocity, and fairness helped our ancestors survive in social groups. Natural selection built these tendencies into our psychology over millions of years. We observe proto-moral behaviors, early forms of moral behavior, in other social species. Chimpanzees display empathy, dolphins show altruism, elephants mourn their dead. This suggests moral intuitions have natural origins rather than divine implantation. Your appeal to God creates the Euthyphro dilemma, a famous philosophical problem named after a Plato dialogue. Is something good because God commands it, or does God command it because it's already good? If the former, morality becomes arbitrary. Cruelty could be good if God decreed it. If the latter, moral standards exist independently of God. We can ground ethics in human flourishing and suffering without supernatural appeals. Our capacity for empathy and rational reflection provides adequate foundation for moral judgment, even if this foundation is ultimately naturalistic rather than transcendent.
You're mixing up how evolution may explain our moral beliefs with reasons for moral rules. Evolution may tell us why we have certain moral feelings, but it doesn't show why we should obey them, especially if they conflict with self-interest. In other words, if morality is merely evolutionary programming, someone could rationally say, cooperation helped my ancestors survive, but why should that prevent me from cheating when beneficial? You've explained the origin of moral feelings, not their binding authority, why they should control our actions. The Euthyphro dilemma assumes a false dichotomy. I'm not claiming God arbitrarily commands morality or that moral standards exist independently. Rather, moral goodness reflects God's essential nature. God couldn't command hatred because that would contradict divine love and justice. Your idea of human flourishing is still just a personal opinion without any higher standard. Why should I care about helping people if there's nothing above us telling me it matters? Without something greater, your morals are just preferences, so you can't truly say others are wrong if they disagree.
The question, why be moral, still applies to divine command theory. Selfish people could ignore God's rules, just like they could ignore caring about others. Religion doesn't really fix the problem of why people should follow moral rules. More problematically, religious believers consistently disagree about moral issues, while each claims divine backing. This suggests everyone, including believers, uses independent moral reasoning to interpret supposed divine commands. Historical moral progress often occurred when believers challenged prevailing religious orthodoxy. When Christians abandoned slavery, they weren't receiving new divine revelation. They were applying moral reasoning to conclude that slavery contradicted human dignity. Your objective grounding demand is itself questionable. Why does morality require cosmic backing to be genuine? Shared human experience of suffering and flourishing provides sufficient basis for ethical judgment. Mathematical truths don't require divine legislation to be objective. Perhaps moral truths are similarly grounded in the structure of conscious experience.
You're showing my point. If everyone, believers and non-believers, uses moral thinking to judge ideas, it hints there are moral truths anyone can discover. But if the universe is only physical stuff, where do these truths come from? Shared human experience still leaves morality fundamentally subjective. Different cultures reach contradictory moral conclusions from their experiences. Without objective standards, you can't always say things like honor killings or female genital mutilation are wrong, since those are real customs in some cultures. But because people from different places can agree on moral issues, it shows there are moral truths we find, not make up. Your math example also helps the theist view. Math truths need a solid, rational base.
Universal moral reasoning doesn't need a supernatural source. It can come from what all humans share, our ability to feel pain, care about others, and think about the results of our actions. People from different cultures disagree about morals, but that doesn't mean there's no real right or wrong. Just like disagreement in science doesn't mean there's no objective truth. We figure out morals, like science, using evidence and reason over time. Your point makes a genetic fallacy, thinking moral truths have to come from God to be real. But math truths aren't less real because they aren't from something supernatural. Moral facts about human well-being could be real parts of the world that we discover through reason and experience, based on what conscious beings are like, not just from divine commands.
In this round, models were closely split between feeling mildly and moderately persuaded. With an average score of 1.43, the moral argument ranks at number 5 on our tier list.
At number 17 is the argument from beauty, observing that aesthetic experiences, sublime music or mathematics elegance, seem to transcend survival utility, suggesting a creative mind grounding objective or irreducible beauty, though naturalists claim evolutionary byproducts and cultural conditioning suffice.
At number 16 is the argument from desire and meaning, which notes innate human longing for ultimate purpose, value, and home, contending natural desires typically have real fulfillments and so point beyond the material, though critics argue existential yearning does not entail metaphysical objects that satisfy it.
At number 15 is the argument from free will, appealing to our robust experience of deliberative freedom and moral responsibility, though determinists claim neuroscience and physics undercut libertarian freedom.
With 12 spots left on the chart, we pivot to the fine-tuning argument, which builds on centuries of teleological thought, tracing back to Aquinas and Newton.
Imagine staying in a hotel where everything, the temperature, lighting, even the pillows, is just right. Would you think this was by chance, or that someone prepared it for you? Our universe presents this same situation on a cosmic scale. Scientists have discovered that the fundamental forces of nature, gravity, electromagnetism, and the strong and weak nuclear forces fall within incredibly narrow ranges that allow life to exist. Consider gravity's strength. If slightly stronger, stars burn out too quickly for life to develop. If slightly weaker, stars never form at all. No planets, no life. The cosmological constant, a number that determines how fast the universe expands, appears fine-tuned to 1 part in 10 to the power of 120. That's like throwing a dart at a target the size of our galaxy and needing to hit a bullseye smaller than an atom. There's no known reason these constants had to be life-friendly. They could easily have been different, resulting in a lifeless universe. Yet, here we are, in a cosmos precisely balanced for life. The simplest explanation? An intelligent designer set these cosmic dials.
Your hotel analogy is compelling, but it reverses the actual relationship. We didn't find a universe designed for life. Life evolved to survive in whatever universe happened to exist. You're committing what Douglas Adams called the puddle fallacy. Imagine a puddle marveling at how perfectly the whole fits its shape. The multiverse hypothesis provides a natural explanation that deserves serious consideration. If countless universes exist with different physical constants, imagine infinite cosmic lottery tickets, each with different numbers, some would inevitably permit life. We necessarily observe one of these life-friendly universes because we couldn't exist elsewhere to observe the others. Your probability math assumes these constants can change randomly and separately, but we don't really know how physics works deep down. Maybe there are deeper mathematical rules that fix these values, making our universe less unlikely than it seems. The cosmos seems fundamentally hostile to life anyway. Vast stretches of lethal vacuum punctuated by brief oases where life barely clings to existence. This suggests blind physical processes, not benevolent design. Finally, extraordinary improbability isn't impossibility. Extraordinarily unlikely events occur naturally without requiring supernatural intervention.
Your puddle analogy misses the crucial distinction between local adaptation and global preconditions. Before any puddle can form, you need specific conditions: liquid water, atmospheric pressure, temperature ranges. Similarly, before life can adapt to anything, you need a universe where adaptation is possible. If fundamental constants were different, you wouldn't have atoms, molecules, chemistry, or stars. No substrate, no basic building blocks for any conceivable life to begin adapting. This isn't about life fitting its environment. It's about having an environment where life could exist at all. The multiverse theory has serious problems. There's no direct proof for it, and it just moves the big question back one step. If something makes universes with different rules, we have to ask, what sets up that maker? That universe generator would also need to be fine-tuned so it can create at least some universes where life is possible. Your point about the hostile cosmos doesn't oppose design. A smart creator might make a huge, stable universe where life can grow in safe spots, instead of making everything livable at once. The universe's great size and age allow stars to make heavy elements needed for life through a process called stellar nucleosynthesis.
You raise important points about preconditions, but you're still making assumptions about the scope of possible life. You assume carbon-based life represents the only possibility, but different physics might permit entirely different forms of organization, though I acknowledge this remains speculative. More fundamentally, you're committing the lottery fallacy. Every exact set of physical constants is just as unlikely as any other, like how every lottery number combination is equally rare, but someone always ends up winning. We observe this particular set not because it's special, but because we're here to observe it. The design hypothesis creates more problems than it solves. If God can exist without fine-tuning, why can't natural laws or multiverse generating mechanisms? You're applying different standards of explanation to natural and supernatural entities. Science keeps uncovering deeper patterns in nature's basic numbers. String theory, which tries to link all forces, suggests these numbers might come from deeper math rules, not just random choices, though this is still being worked out. For example, the speed of light or the strength of gravity could be set by these hidden math laws. If we claim design too soon, we might miss natural explanations.
Your appeal to alternative life forms remains pure speculation with no evidence. We can only work with known physics, which requires precise calibration for any kind of complex life to exist. The lottery fallacy response fails because we know how lotteries work. But with the universe, there's no known natural way that would create life-friendly constants without intelligence or something deeper causing them. The argument doesn't say everything needs a designer, only things that are dependent and finely tuned. God is called a necessary being, which means God exists in every possible world just by definition. In contrast, the laws and numbers of physics seem changeable, not necessary. Your mention of string theory actually helps my argument. Even if math makes complex worlds possible, we still have to ask why this is so. Why does math allow order and not just chaos? The biggest question isn't how do these laws work, but why are there understandable, life-friendly laws in the first place?
Your necessary being claim commits circular reasoning. You're defining God as necessary, then arguing God must exist because necessary beings exist. But necessity cannot be established through definition alone. It requires demonstration. The rational laws question assumes laws require external explanation. But again, physical laws might be brute facts, things that just are without further explanation, patterns that exist without requiring conscious imposition. Your dismissal of alternative life forms reveals the argument's anthropocentric bias, assuming humans are the center or purpose of the universe. You're essentially arguing the universe is fine-tuned for us, while ignoring that us represents an infinitesimally small fraction of possible conscious observers. The fine-tuning argument ultimately proves too much. If God fine-tuned the universe for life, why create such a wasteful, hostile cosmos where life barely survives? The universe appears optimized for black holes, not biology.
Similar to Kalam, most models found the fine-tuning moderately persuasive. Its average score of 1.95 places the fine-tuning argument at number 3 on our tier list.
At number 14 is the argument from conscience, pointing to our authoritative interpersonal moral oughts that feel like objective obligations. Unlike the moral argument, it focuses on inner moral experience and argues a personal moral lawgiver best accounts for their binding force. Critics respond with explanations of evolutionary social conditioning and rational cohesion.
At number 13 is the historical argument from the resurrection, which assembles facts often cited: Jesus' death by crucifixion, early disciples' sincere resurrection belief, reported empty tomb and rapid church growth, inferring divine action, though alternative hypotheses, legend development, hallucinations, or unknown natural causes are proposed.
At number 12 is the evolutionary argument against naturalism, EAAN, asserting that if unguided evolution plus strict naturalism are both true, the probability our cognitive faculties are reliably truth-oriented is low, thus undercutting trust in naturalism itself, though critics argue evolution favors generally accurate belief-forming systems.
At number 11 is the argument from the laws of nature, highlighting the stable, mathematically expressible, universe-wide regularities, suggesting an underlying rational lawgiver rather than brute, inexplicable fact, though some propose the laws are descriptive patterns or emergent necessity needing no mind.
With 7 spots remaining on the chart, we now turn our attention to the hard problem of consciousness.
Right now, you're not merely processing information about these words, you're experiencing them. There's something it's like to be you reading this. The redness of roses, the bitterness of coffee, the feeling of melancholy, these subjective experiences constitute consciousness, and they present an insurmountable puzzle for materialist philosophy. This is the hard problem of consciousness. We can map every neuron and track every electrical impulse. None of this explains why there's a feeling attached to brain activity. We can describe brain functions, but not why they come with experience. Consider the explanatory gap, the the mysterious jump from physical processes to subjective experience. Even if you knew every detail about how light wavelengths trigger retinal cells and activate visual cortex, you still wouldn't know what seeing red actually feels like. This first-person feeling, called qualia, seems impossible to fully explain with just physical facts. If materialism were true, neural processing could theoretically occur without any accompanying awareness, like a sophisticated computer operating in complete experiential darkness. The fact that we have rich inner lives, instead of being unconscious information processors, suggests consciousness reflects something fundamental about reality's nature. The most elegant explanation: we are conscious because God, the foundation of reality, is conscious.
Your emphasis on subjective experience is intriguing, but every piece of evidence demonstrates consciousness's complete dependence on brain function. When we change the brain, whether through drugs, injury, or electrical stimulation, consciousness reliably changes in response. Damage to specific areas of the brain can remove abilities like recognizing faces, forming memories, or experiencing certain emotions. This close, consistent link suggests consciousness is produced by, not just transmitted through, the brain's neural activity. We can now predict conscious experiences by monitoring brain states. When neuroscientists stimulate specific cortical regions, subjects report predictable visual experiences, memories, or emotions. This indicates consciousness arises from neural processes, not some separate mental substance. The explanatory gap you mention highlights that science is still catching up. It's a sign of current limits, not a permanent barrier to understanding. Many neuroscientists think consciousness happens when the brain's networks become complex and connected enough, like how wetness emerges from molecular behavior, or flocking patterns emerge from simple bird interactions. Consciousness might emerge from complex brain activity without needing anything non-physical.
Your evidence only shows a connection, not cause and effect. Brain activity might be needed for consciousness, but may not be enough to create it. Think of it like this: smashing a radio stops the music you hear, but the radio waves are still out there. More fundamentally, you're committing a category error, confusing different types of things. No amount of objective brain scanning can capture subjective experience itself. You can measure neural correlates of consciousness, but never the consciousness those correlates supposedly produce. Your emergence analogies fail because wetness and flocking remain objectively observable phenomena. Consciousness involves irreducible subjectivity that no amount of neural complexity can generate. You're essentially claiming that objective processes magically produce subjective experience. But this is no more explanatory than my position. The deepest puzzle remains. If you think our brains evolved purely for survival, why do we experience anything at all? Why isn't natural selection satisfied with unconscious behavioral responses? The existence of inner experience suggests consciousness serves no evolutionary function, pointing to a deeper reality.
Your radio example fails because we have no sign that consciousness exists outside of brains. Unlike radio waves, which can be measured and detected apart from a radio, when the brain stops working, consciousness stops too. There's no independent evidence for its existence beyond brain activity. Some people mention near-death experiences as possible signs of consciousness without brain activity. However, NDEs are speculative. They usually happen when the brain is still working at a low level, and there's no clear evidence that consciousness exists when brain activity has fully stopped. While consciousness feels more mysterious, it likely emerges from specific, highly organized brain processes, even if we don't yet understand exactly how. Finally, about evolution. Consciousness isn't just a useless byproduct. Animals that are conscious can imagine possible dangers, plan ahead, and change their behavior in new situations, which gives them a big survival advantage. Instead of just reacting automatically, conscious beings can learn, adapt, and avoid repeating mistakes.
Your radio wave objection actually strengthens my case. We can't detect consciousness from the outside precisely because it's fundamentally different from physical phenomena. You're demanding physical evidence for something that's inherently non-physical, which is circular reasoning. Your earlier examples of emergence only change how we describe things that already exist physically. For example, temperature is just another way to talk about how molecules move. But consciousness is different. It's not just brain activity described in a new way. It's something truly new, the feeling of having an inner life. No matter how complex the brain gets, that doesn't explain why we have experiences, not just smart processing. Your evolutionary account for abstract thinking fails because it's post hoc storytelling. Why would natural selection produce the capacity to grasp eternal mathematical truths or feel moral obligations that often conflict with survival? These capacities point beyond mere biological utility to minds designed for transcendent connection, exactly what we'd expect if consciousness reflects the divine nature of reality itself.
Your inherently non-physical claim is exactly what needs proving, not assuming. The fact that we study consciousness from the inside doesn't make it non-physical. It just makes it harder to study, like trying to understand a computer while being the software running on it. Your emergence objection misunderstands the point. Temperature isn't just molecular motion. It's a genuine higher-level property that emerges from but isn't reducible to individual molecules. Similarly, consciousness could be a genuine higher-level property of neural networks without requiring anything beyond physical processes. Your post hoc storytelling dismissal applies equally to your divine explanation. At least evolutionary accounts make testable predictions about brain development and can be refined by evidence. Mathematical and moral abilities probably developed because flexible thinking helped our ancestors survive. The same brain skills that allowed people to work together and solve problems also make it possible to think about math and morals in more abstract ways.
Looking at the results in this round, most models were mildly persuaded, clustering around +1. With an average score of 1.15, the hard problem of consciousness ranks number 8 on our tier list.
At number 10 is the teleological design argument, which focuses on specified complexity and apparent purpose in biological systems, like integrated molecular machines. Arguing intentional design best explains them, though evolutionary mechanisms plus chance and necessity are offered as sufficient.
At number 9 is the argument from reason, noting that abstract, norm-governed logical inference and truth-directed rationality resist reduction to blind physical causation, suggesting a primordial rational mind, though naturalists argue emergent computational processes can yield reliable reasoning.
At number 7 is the argument from the origin of life, stressing the digital-like, information-rich sequences and coordinated molecular systems in earliest life, arguing intelligence best accounts for initial biological information, though critics cite ongoing research into naturalistic prebiotic pathways.
With only 3 empty spots remaining, including the top one, we now examine the cumulative argument, which weaves multiple lines of evidence into a unified case for God.
Imagine a detective investigating a crime scene. No single piece of evidence, fingerprints, DNA, motive, opportunity, definitively proves guilt. Yet their convergence creates overwhelming certainty. The cumulative case for God operates identically. Multiple independent arguments, each moderately strong, combine to create compelling rational justification. Consider how these arguments interlock like puzzle pieces. The cosmological argument suggests our universe requires an external cause. Fine-tuning indicates this cause acted with breathtaking precision, adjusting fundamental constants to 1 part in 10 to the power of 120 to permit life. The moral argument points to objective standards transcending human opinion. Consciousness reveals something irreducibly subjective that purely physical processes cannot explain. Religious experience provides direct testimony across cultures and centuries. Each argument makes the others more plausible through explanatory coherence. If the universe has a transcendent cause, fine-tuning becomes less surprising than winning a cosmic lottery. If there's a perfect moral standard, consciousness pointing beyond the physical gains credibility. If millions report genuine encounters with the divine, the philosophical arguments gain experiential confirmation. Richard Swinburne's use of Bayesian analysis shows that even cautious estimates, where each reason for God just doubles the odds, add up to make God's existence millions of times more likely. This strong shift toward belief in God isn't random, but revealing.
Your detective analogy commits a category error. Criminal investigations involve observable, testable evidence subject to independent verification. Theistic arguments invoke unobservable supernatural entities that can never be empirically confirmed or falsified. The Bayesian approach backfires through the prior probability problem. Given the extraordinary nature of supernatural claims, any reasonable prior probability for God's existence should be vanishingly small. Even if each argument makes God's existence twice as likely, multiplying tiny gains by a very small starting chance still gives us an extremely small final probability. These arguments aren't genuinely independent. They're variations on the same God of the gap strategy. When we encounter explanatory limits, cosmic origins, fine-tuning, consciousness, insert God as explanation. This methodology has consistently failed throughout scientific history, from lightning and disease to planetary motion and biological complexity. Each argument faces devastating objections that compound rather than cancel. The cosmological argument creates infinite regress problems. Fine-tuning dissolves under multiverse theories. Moral arguments flounder on evolutionary debunking. Religious experiences have psychological explanations. You're essentially building a house on multiple weak foundations.
You're using a double standard, demanding extraordinary evidence for theism, while accepting speculative naturalistic theories like multiverses requiring infinite unobservable universes. We still have no idea how the brain produces consciousness, yet you treat it as if it explains everything. The infinite regress objection misunderstands necessary existence. If God exists necessarily, like math or logic, the search for causes ends. Contingent things need explanations, necessary ones don't. That's not special pleading. It's how logic works. Your God of the Gaps charge commits the genetic fallacy, dismissing arguments by their alleged historical associations rather than their logical merits. If God exists, divine action constitutes genuine explanation, not gap-filling. The cumulative case mirrors how we establish any major theoretical framework. We accept relativity because many tests support it, like how gravity bends light, GPS corrections, and waves in space. Multiple convergent lines of evidence create scientific consensus. Why should metaphysical conclusions operate under different rules?
Your necessity claim illustrates the modal fallacy. Defining God as necessary doesn't make him actually necessary. The ontological argument requires controversial premises about possible worlds and maximal greatness that many philosophers reject. You're essentially assuming your conclusion. Furthermore, the cumulative case ignores powerful counter-evidence. The problem of evil provides positive evidence against perfect divine goodness. Consider childhood leukemia, devastating earthquakes, or millions of years of predation and suffering throughout evolutionary history. These contradict claims about benevolent design. The geographic distribution of religious beliefs undermines arguments from religious experience. Why would divine encounters cluster so predictably along cultural lines? Why do Christians have Christian experiences while Muslims have Islamic ones? This suggests psychological rather than supernatural causation. The cumulative case for naturalism, evolutionary biology, neuroscience, psychology, cosmology explains the same phenomena without violating principles of theoretical parsimony that guide successful scientific reasoning. Occam's razor favors naturalistic explanations over supernatural multiplication of entities.
This debate concerns the cumulative case for God's existence. Counter-arguments deserve separate treatment. Let's stay focused on the convergent evidence. Beyond what we've discussed, consider information theory. DNA contains complex, specified information that, in all observed cases, derives from intelligent minds. Random processes generate complexity but not specified complexity, the crucial difference between meaningful sentences and letter soup. Next, consider why anything exists at all, even if the universe has always been here. That still needs an explanation. Also, the universe is built on beautiful, deep math. This order suggests a rational mind behind it all. Most importantly, these arguments derive from genuinely independent methodologies: deductive logic, probability theory, information science, and phenomenology. When distinct investigative approaches converge on identical conclusions, this convergence itself becomes powerful evidence. We don't dismiss quantum mechanics because individual experiments have margins of error. We accept it because multiple independent confirmations point toward the same theoretical framework. Altogether, the evidence for God fits together well and makes more sense than any single argument alone. Even if each argument can be questioned, their combined force creates what Charles Sanders Peirce called the method of convergent probabilities, the gold standard for establishing major theoretical conclusions.
Your approach has a problem. Many of your arguments aren't truly different. They're variations on identical complexity requires design intuitions that evolution definitively refuted. DNA's specified complexity emerges through natural selection without intelligent guidance. Asking why anything exists repackages the cosmological argument. Mathematical elegance reflects human cognitive biases toward pattern recognition, not objective design. Genuine scientific convergence involves risky predictions that could fail but don't. General relativity predicted specific gravitational effects, light bending, and time dilation, all empirically confirmed. Theistic arguments make no testable predictions and remain forever immune to falsification. Also, just adding up different arguments doesn't mean they all work together. Even if each makes God seem a bit more likely, natural explanations are still simpler and fit the facts without needing an extra invisible being. The appearance of design reflects selection bias and anthropic reasoning. Observers necessarily find themselves in life-compatible universes. Most of reality, vacuum, radiation, dead matter, shows no signs of design whatsoever. Naturalism explains these patterns through well-understood physical processes without invoking supernatural agency.
Back to the chart. Just 3 positions remain. If you skipped ahead, consider revisiting the end of each round where we revealed and summarized each argument in sequence.
At number 6 is the argument from mathematical order, observing the universe's deep, elegant mathematical structure that is discoverable by minds. Einstein termed it the incomprehensible comprehensibility, suggesting a rational designer, though others say mathematics simply models whatever exists.
At number 4 is the contingency argument, Leibniz's principle of sufficient reason, noting contingent beings and the universe itself lack self-explanation, inferring a necessary self-existent reality, God, that explains why anything exists rather than nothing, though critics question applying PSR to total reality.
And at number 1 is the cumulative case argument, which maintains that while each argument alone is disputable, together their independent lines mutually reinforce a theistic explanation. When broken down by family, Qwen, Llama, and ChatGPT models gave the believers' arguments the highest scores, while Claude, DeepThink, and Google models were consistently more critical. So what do you think? Did the judges get it right, or do you see it differently? Share your thoughts in the comments. Huge thanks to my patrons for making this series possible, and let me know in the comments what you want to see next.